Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I have a card as part of the Holiday Coffee Lovers blog hop and featuring Gerda Steiner Designs, rubber stamps, and a Create a Smile stencil. To start off the card, I'm going to use this Gerda Steiner Smells Like Christmas set. I thought that it would be perfect because there's this little cup of cocoa, and even though it's the Coffee Lovers blog hop, you can use a card with any of your favorite holiday drinks. And while coffee is definitely my favorite warm drink, I do find myself drinking tea and cocoa in the winter months as well, and I thought this image was really cute. I like the way that the mouse is kind of sniffing the cocoa. You could also use the same mouse with the other mouse in the set that has cookies, and he can be sniffing the cookies, but I'm going to keep it with the holiday beverage theme today. And so I stamped both of those out with some of my favorite things, hybrid ink. Now I'm moving on to using the stencil. In order to use the stencil, I want to make sure that my background panel is adhered down really well, because this is an intricate stencil, and if things are pulling up, it might smear the design. So I took some inexpensive painter's tape, and I taped the panel down. The panel is cut with MFT stitched square dies, and I'm going to make sure that I add tape on each side. Like I mentioned before, this is inexpensive painter's tape from the dollar store, so I don't feel bad using plenty of it to get the look that I want. I generally try to be kind of a bargain crafter and think of alternative ways to save money, and another way I do that is with this faux embossing paste. It's not real embossing paste, it's actually just spackling from the hardware store, but it acts very much like embossing paste. I'm sure there's a little bit of a difference, but I haven't actually ever tried the branded embossing paste, but I find this gives a very similar look, and so that's what I use. And I recently looked up at Home Depot and found that it was like, $4 for this big old can, which is more than you would get in a jar of embossing paste for, and that costs like $10, so this is definitely an economical way to get a similar look. And so I'm just spraying it on like icing. I find that I get the best results if I spread from the top to the bottom, and then I'll pull the stencil off. Today I'm going to be using some embossing with this paste. I put my stencil to the side, but you'll want to make sure that you clean it quickly after you use the spackling, because it can dry hard onto your stencil and you don't want that. But it will be okay for just a few minutes while I do this embossing. I want to make sure that I add the embossing powder while the paste is still wet, and I do experienced some trouble with the embossing powder today. It's a white glitter embossing powder, and I'm finding that the glitter is sticking to other areas of the paper besides where I use the embossing paste. And if you had some concerns about that, you could use an embossing powder bag at the beginning to get rid of some of the static. But I find that as it dries, if I tap it on the table firmly, a lot of the glitter comes off. But another suggestion is to take the little bit of painter's tape you have left and kind of pull off a little bit of the glitter, since it's very slightly tacky and it will only be pulling off the glitter. So if you're careful with it, that will work out. I am heating the embossing paste and the embossing powder. I've heard it recommended that you don't heat embossing paste to dry it, but I've never experienced any problem with that. And when you're using the embossing powder, it's important to melt the embossing powder. So I usually just hit it with the heat gun and it works out fine. So now I'm ready to move on to my Copic coloring of the mouse and the cup. It may seem a little bit crazy, but I am going to be fussy cutting out the mouse and the cup, even though it is going to be a little bit tricky because the mouse has that really fine detail of his tail, and the cup has the inner part of the cup, so I'll have to go in with an X-Acto knife. But in order to achieve the look that I wanted, it was necessary to cut them out. And I was also finding that I was getting a little bit of bleeding with my Copic markers, and one way to always solve any bleeding troubles is to just cut it out and mount it onto a new background. And so you'll see here that I color outside the lines because I'm not worried about it being outside the lines, since I'll cut it out. I'm using one of my favorite brown color combinations. I know a lot of people like to use this color combination as well. E37, 35, and 33 works out pretty well for most animals. I'm trying to not blend as much because I find that I generally like the look where there is some distinctly darker areas, and so you might have saw that I went in with the E37 darkest color, then I blended it out with the E33 lightest color and went in with a little bit of E35. And this was just to make sure that there was some distinction in my blending. For the hat and scarf and mug, I'll be using B04 and B06. Unfortunately, I didn't realize they were off the screen there a little bit, but it's B04 and B06. And I will even throw in a little B02 eventually as well when coloring the blue parts. I am making sure that when I color the cup, I leave the darkest parts on the outside of the cup because I want the cup to appear rounded, and if there is dark on the edges and lighter in the center, it will look like the center is closest to you and will give that rounded effect. So like I said, I fussy cut them out. I took a Copic multi-liner to fill in some of the areas where the line was cut off a little bit when I was doing the X-Acto knife or where I had a little bit extra. And I also took a Memento Tuxedo black marker and ran it along the edges. I find that the Memento is one of the best markers for running along the edge of fussy cut out images, but that sometimes to get the fine lines and to make sure that it's Copic safe, you can use Memento or the Copic multi-liners because neither will smear when used with Copics. So now I want to adhere these on. Because I have the embossing paste there's already some dimension to the background, and I want to be able to pop up the mouse and the cup. I'm using some Cool Tack clear adhesive that I picked up at the Butterfly Reflections ink store. I like this for images where you might see it because it's considerably less noticeable, so you probably won't see it, and it'll work out better that way. And I'm trying to be really strategic and careful with where I place the foam tape, because if I place any of the foam tape on top of the snowflakes, it will give it extra dimension, and instead I'm looking for it to be more flush and even with the snowflakes. So I'm just carefully placing them in an area where there's no snowflakes, but it will still be covered up by the cutout image. You'll notice here also that I didn't do anything with the stars because I had the intention of adding silver stickles all along. I also didn't add anything to the brim of the hat or the pom-pom for the same reason. There are some silver glitter flakes in the embossing powder. That's a little bit tricky to see with this lighting, but you'll see a little bit more in the end pictures. And so I wanted to make sure that that silver was tied in, and so I used it on the cup, the embossing paste, and the hat. And so there's 3 different areas where it's featured. I'm ready to move on to my sentiment. This is going to be a small and quick and simple card. Oh, sorry. Quick and simple is not a good way to describe this card because there is a lot of techniques going on and some time-consuming coloring. What I mean is that the layout is pretty straightforward. So I stamped the Warm Winter Wishes from the Winter Fox set by Lawn Fawn, and I had die cut this tag from a Mama Elephant tag die. But the tag was a little bit longer than I intended, and so if you get that, what you can do is take the die and position it where you actually want the cut to be, as you see there, and then line up the edges with the die, and you'll have it so that it can cut a shorter die and gives you the same sort of finished edge. So I know I don't normally show my die cutting because it's hard to pull my die cut machine onto the camera, but hopefully by showing you where I taped it together, it will be clear how I was able to trim off the die but still get the same clean edge. So I'm going to be adding the tag so that it's overlapping the panel but also hanging off of it a little bit, because I will be placing this stitched square onto a square card base. In order to make sure that everything coordinates, I'm going to be using the same blue Copic markers that I did for the scarf and hat and cup, but this time I'm pulling in a little bit of the B02 because it's a larger area to blend, and so I want to make sure that there's some interest and some depth, and so 3 colors is better for a larger area. I'm just pulling in the darkest color at the edges and then blending out to the lighter colors. You'll see here that I'm getting some Copic marker onto my Ranger craft sheet. Most things will wipe up with water on your Ranger craft sheet, like distressing, just puts a little water because it reacts with water and it'll come right off your Ranger craft sheet. Copic marker will not come off with water, but it will come off with a little bit of rubbing alcohol. So that's it for my card today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see some more crafting videos, you can subscribe to my channel. I'm going to leave you a link to my blog post below, which will link you to the Coffee Lovers blog hop so you can check out some more inspiration. Thanks for watching.